This year, it was my honor to be one of the nominating judges for the Independent Games Festival Awards. The Independent Games Festival is an event that's part of the Game Developers Conference that happens every spring in San Francisco. The IGF is a bit like the Sundance Film Festival, but for independent games, and their awards are closely watched by game developers because they often showcase some of the most innovative thinking in game making for that year. As a judge, I was one of 200 or 300 developers who was asked to wade through the more than 500 submitted games and recommend some of them for awards in design, visual arts, audio, narrative, and overall innovation. From these recommendations, a select group of jurors will choose the final winners before the awards ceremony in March. Today, I wanted to share just some of the games that I played as part of judging for the IGF because I think it's a very fun way to get a sample of the creative energy that's out there in the indie game world. A couple of things before I dive into the games. A bit unintuitively, IGF nominees don't have to be finished and released products. Some of them are still in development, and games that might be years from release can and have won, especially in categories like game design or the so-called Nuovo Award for innovation. Because these aren't all released products, some of the developers who enter the competition aren't ready to reveal their game or have it talked about publicly, so I'm following whatever guidelines the creators set down for what can be shown and talked about with their games. Similarly, the actual judging is a confidential process, and I'm not going to talk about how I rated any of these games or what awards I recommended them for. Again, I just wanted to share with you that these games exist, or will soon exist, and just kind of wallow with you in all the diversity and creativity of the indie game scene, like happy, happy pigs. Let's start with some of the more high-profile indie games that I already had on my radar before the IGF's judging started, but that I hadn't gotten to until I was assigned to judge them. One of these is Opus Magnum from Zachtronics, a puzzle and programming game where you build machines to combine and transmute alchemical compounds. Zachtronics has specialized in this kind of logic and optimization game for a while. In fact, they released 2 of them in about the last year, Opus Magnum and the cyberpunk hacking game Exapunks. The mechanical style of Opus Magnum and its predecessor Space Chem agree with me much more than the straight-up coding interfaces of some of their other titles, so I was very much anticipating this game. That said, it's still kicking my butt hard. There were a number of tantalizing platformer games in the IGF this year, not surprisingly, including The Messenger, a nostalgia-soaked combat platformer clearly inspired by Ninja Gaiden. One highlight of the game is its almost Marx Brothers-esque meta-references to the conventions of video games. You can almost feel the game waggling its eyebrows at you with each little inside joke. The other highlight, which borders on a spoiler but frankly is the main reason to check this game out, is how it switches from an 8-bit ninja game with linear levels into a 16-bit ninja game where you return to those same levels and play them Metroidvania style, exploring places you couldn't get to before. The art and music have been executed in both NES and Super NES style, and frankly, it's just fun to experience and compare both of those styles. The Messenger is very clever and well crafted. It's also not as punishingly difficult as I first assumed, although it has its fair share of tricky moments late in the game. A platformer of a different stripe is Wandersong, which doesn't care one whit about being challenging. Instead, it's an adorable and joyful and emotional journey through a colorful musical world. You're a bard with a mission to save the world, armed only with an extremely positive attitude and the ability to sing pretty much any time. The game is constantly presenting you with new mechanics tied in with your singing, which you do by pointing the right analog stick in one of 8 directions. Wandersong is silly and open-hearted and includes some really moving moments and serious themes about altruism and self-sacrifice. A lesser-known team whose game caught my eye a few months ago is Reptoid Games and their Fossil Hunters game. Fossil Hunters has you going underground to dig for dinosaur bones. You can then arrange those bones into skeletons to complete missions or just earn money. I love the concept of a casual paleontology game, and the core mechanics are rich with possibility. I bet they're even more compelling when played in co-op mode, which I didn't get a chance to try. Okay, having covered some games that are out right now, let me spotlight some games that are coming in the future that I had the pleasure to experience thanks to the IGF. Shakedown Hawaii is an open-world crime simulator inspired by the top-down Grand Theft Auto games from the 90s. This is the second such game from Vblank Games, their first being Retro City Rampage. Shakedown Hawaii seems like a refinement of the formula, with some economic management layered on top as your venal CEO character takes over obsolete industries and rattles small business owners for protection money. It's cynical and satirical, but also energetic and colorful, and I enjoy its arcade-style take on open-world mayhem over the increasingly self-serious approach of Rockstar's AAA version. My Time at Portia is not officially released, but it has been in early access for quite a while. It's already an impressively big, sprawling crafting game, like a 3D Stardew Valley. You can build tools, farm, collect resources, dig for artifacts, decorate your house, go fishing, chat with townsfolk, and on and on and on. Frankly, since there is so much and the game takes its time opening these features up to you, I'm not sure that I even saw enough of what the game has to offer to say how it all hangs together in the end, but it's certainly ambitious and pretty well constructed. If we're talking about games we're anticipating, perhaps the brightest star in the 2019 firmament for me is One Finger Death Punch 2. Well, you mean you haven't heard of One Finger Death Punch 1? Well, that's a real shame, but I hope the second in the series helps Silver Dollar Games earn the recognition they deserve for this series. One Finger Death Punch is a martial arts game that only requires 2 buttons. One to attack to the right, and one to attack to the left. Layered on that simple design is just a ton of VFX and over-the-top animations that turn your simple stick figure fighter into a Bruce Lee-level ass-kicker. We're talking wading through hundreds of enemies at breakneck speeds, tossing knives, shooting arrows, tearing out hearts. I love everything about One Finger Death Punch, and if you haven't played the first one, just get it immediately so you too can be waiting eagerly for the sequel. One of the wonderful things about the indie game scene is how it fosters some really unique individual visions of what games can be. Some indie games are just delightfully weird, and there's no shortage of those in the IGF. Take this game, for example. Grace Bruxner presents The Haunted Island, a frog detective game. This little adventure game by artist and developer Grace Bruxner is as silly and charming as it looks. You're a frog. You go to an island ruled by a sloth. You try to figure out what's up with the ghost that's haunting the island. It's got adventure game mechanics that, as far as I can tell, are intentionally rudimentary, illustrating the disparity between puzzles that are logical, which these are, and puzzles that are sensical. These ones are as absurd as the rest of the premise. If you enjoyed the bizarro, bureaucratic gameplay of indie darling Papers, Please, you might get similarly wrapped up in Don't Feed the Monkeys, a twisted game of spying and deduction and survival. In this game, you sit in front of your computer doing the dirty work of a shadowy secret society that is surveilling various people and places for purposes you're mostly just left to imagine. You use a simulated internet to search for more information based off clues you uncover. At the same time, you have to keep yourself fed and watered, which means spending some of your valuable voyeurism time working odd jobs for cash and going grocery shopping. Balancing these things is demanding and a bit disturbing, which seems to be very much the point. The game seems to imply there's a method to your mysterious employer's madness and that all the little stories you experience while spying might tie together in some way, but I couldn't keep my head above water long enough to see it through, at least on my first couple attempts. 39 Days to Mars is a short but incredibly charming 2-player cooperative game about a couple of British inventors and their leisurely excursion to Mars on an extremely unreliable 19th century spaceship. Sir Albert Wickies and the Right Honourable Clarence Baxter talk and behave just about how you would expect, insisting on cooking a scone or making a proper spot of tea before they set about fixing the engine fire on board their ship or gathering additional fuel from asteroids via space bicycle. While you can play 39 Days to Mars by yourself, the point is really to play it with a friend, because the game is a collection of 2-player minigames of various kinds, some twitchy, some logical, almost all of them made extra awkward and fun by having to work together to complete them. It's a short adventure, but a memorable one filled with snappy writing and this perfect scribbly artwork. There's no shortage of very beautiful games in the IGF competition, and some games stand out on that criterion alone. Take, for example, She and the Lightbearer, a simple adventure game about a firefly on a fairy tale journey through a living forest. What struck me about the game is just the thoroughness of its artistic style. Every inch of every screen is creatively conceived and lovingly drawn. Also, check out how the ground lights up as the firefly moves around each scene. That's some wonderful visual detail. Planet Alpha is less delicate, but no less beautiful. This is one of those prog rock album covers come to life games, which means you can't help but compare it to No Man's Sky, but here the artwork is more handcrafted and presented in a deeply layered side view like the Trine games. You're a wordless spaceman stranded on this spectacular planet, just trying to, well, keep moving to the right, mostly. But along the way there are locales both bright and splendiferous, and dark and dangerous, and tons of navigation puzzles to master in each. It's like the developers set out to say, Limbo Likes don't have to be all flat and gray, and they ended up shouting it with a megaphone. Speaking of sounds, here's a game that lets its music define its visuals. Just Shapes and Beats is the name of the game, and it's not only an honestly titled time waster, but also just a fine new style of rhythm game. While electronic music blares at you, you have to keep your little square out of harm's way from the rhythmic lasers and bullets and death fields that want to disintegrate you. The levels, and especially the boss battles, have a lot of character and invigorating music. I think I was only disappointed because what I have to do as a player isn't matching the rhythm, but just finding any safe area I can as the screen around my blue square boils with musical energy. If I'm playing well, I'm sort of using my eyes more than my ears. Okay, so audio and art and general weirdness have all had their moment in this video, but what about game design? Well, of course, there are plenty of examples of great game design among the IGF contestants as well. If you like your game design deep, I think you'll want to know about Dead in Vinland, a character-driven, turn-based survival game where your exiled family of rugged Vikings has to try to hold their own in an unknown land. Every day you parcel out your family members' time into an increasingly wide array of vital activities and, well, try not to starve to death or take an axe to the head. Every character has different skills, every crafting facility can be upgraded to be more productive, and there's even a little combat engine for when your very rude neighbors attack. There's also some story elements, which make a nice frosting on the strategy cake, although they seem to hit some standard beats on every playthrough. What I really appreciated is that these heaps of systems were generally still pretty intuitive, thanks to a very finely designed interface. Deep Sixth is another survival game, but with the difference that in this one, you're alone, you're in space, and instead of building things up, you're mostly just trying to keep everything from falling apart around you. For some reason, you're imprisoned on a spaceship and forced to do missions for a futuristic corporation to earn your freedom. Problem is, this spaceship is constantly falling apart. You'll rely on the onboard AI and the extensive user's manual for the ship to help you diagnose and solve things like radiation leaks, hull breaches, booster misfires, and, AI malfunction, so don't trust that AI after all. The manual is your friend. It's actually often quite comedic. For instance, when you look through the manual's instructions for how to repair an air scrubber, and the proper procedure is hit it with a wrench until it starts working again. One of the wonderful things about game design as a practice is that incredible ideas can come in very small packages, and that's kind of how I feel about Fortune 499, which is a 3-color RPG about a witchy oracle working a dead-end job for a magic meta-corporation. That mega-corporation gets infested with demons, which you fight in rock, scissors, paper battles. Simple enough, but here's the catch. You're a witchy oracle, so you can play cards from your divining deck to help predict whether your enemy is going to rock or scissors you, which means you have a pretty good chance of coming out ahead. But the game doesn't stop there. Very quickly, you're thrown into unique fights with special rules that reveal all kinds of interesting wrinkles in your ability to glimpse future Rochambeaus. Frankly, I got a little overwhelmed with all the clever twists that were thrown at me and kind of wish the game let me cruise through a few more straightforward fights. Probably because the twisty ones made me feel kind of dumb when I couldn't figure out how to adapt and win. Cardo is another game with a rich core mechanic, but in this case, the short demo I had available for judging only scratched the surface of what I think it's capable of. In this quaint adventure, the map is the mechanic. You can pick up land tiles and connect them up in different ways to get access to new areas, or to fulfill the requirements of the people who live on them. Who, let's be honest, must be very patient people to live in a world that keeps teleporting chunks around them. Cardo is still in development, but it has its look and its primary gameplay well in hand, so now we only need to wait and see if all that potential is fulfilled. I'm pretty optimistic about Cardo's future. Also worthy of anticipatory hype is Dicey Dungeons, a game that Terry Kavanagh, who made indie classics V and Super Hexagon, has been very speedily incubating in open development. It's a simple procedural dungeon crawler mixed with a deck-building card game, which will make you say, oh, like Slay the Spire, to which I will say, first, yes, but let's give the credit to the classic iOS game Dream Quest, okay? And then I'll say, also, Dicey Dungeons adds dice. You roll your dice to get the right values to power your class's special abilities. The classes all have totally unique playstyles. This game is coming along very, very well, and let's face it, it's probably going to end up as Kavanagh's third indie classic. And speaking of optimism for the future, there is a special category in the competition for student games. So let me spotlight just one of the games in that category because it was just so surprising for the ambition and the level of execution of its small team. En Garde is really the only logical thing to call a game that is all about swashbuckling sword fights. This mini open-world game is Errol Flynn distilled. Not only does your badass Spanish swordswoman know how to stab dudes, but she can knock statues into dudes, kick tables into dudes, drop chandeliers on dudes, flip pots onto the heads of dudes, all the while doing a lot of taunting dudes. En Garde is just so joyfully overflowing with cinematic action that you can't help but be swept away by it. It's over quickly, but that's what you expect from a student project. It's safe to say that we can expect much, much more in the future from these young French developers. Whew, okay, those are only some of the almost 90 games I played for the IGF Awards. I'll be very curious to see which ones get selected by the jury, but the awards aren't what's important, really. It's really the breadth and depth of what video games are doing today that's worth celebrating. Well, thanks for watching, everyone. Keep an eye on the IGF results this coming March, and have fun playing games. See ya!